Okay, so good evening again, everybody. We are coming back again to this little book, The Buddha Before Buddhism, which is Gil Fronsdale's translation and commentary on the Atthakavagga, which is a text. It's a series of, I think it's 16 sets of poems, 16 poems from the Sutta Nipata, which is in turn out of the Khuddaka Nikaya, which is one of the main collections within the Pali Canon. These verses, these poems, are all about, they're most about clinging to views and clinging to sensual pleasures. This one goes off, it's about craving, but it's about, most of them are craving, not clinging, craving to, good note is it's clinging to views and clinging to sensual pleasures. So this one's a little bit off, but it's the same basic theme. There are not a lot of lists and so forth in here. So what I'm going to do is I am going to read this poem once through. It's 2 pages. I'm going to read it through, and then I'll read it through a second time, talking about it as I go. And then when I've done that, I'll stop recording and we'll just discuss. So here we go. It's called the Eightfold Discourse on the Hiding Place. For someone sunk in confusion, even if well concealed in a hiding place, seclusion is far away in this world. Excuse me, let me start that again. For someone sunk in confusion, even if well concealed in a hiding place, seclusion is far away. In this world, it's not easy to let go of desires. Hard to free are those tied to wishes and bound to the charm of existence. Surely one isn't liberated by others. Longing for what has been and what can be, they hunger for sensual pleasures that they've had. Greedy, stingy, attached and obsessed with desires, they are wedded to disharmony. Presented with suffering, they lament, "What will become of us when we pass away from here?" Therefore, you should train right here. Don't do what you know is out of harmony with the world. Life is short, say the wise. I see people thrashing about in the world, thirsting for states of existence, not freed from craving, becoming, and non-becoming. Lowly people weep in the face of death. See them thrashing about in their selfishness, like fish in tiny puddles of a drying stream. Observing this, live unselfishly, not forming attachments to becoming. Subduing desire for both sides, fully understanding sense experience, freed of greed, and doing nothing one would reproach oneself for. A sage does not attach to what is seen or heard. Fully understanding concepts, and having crossed the flood, sages don't cling to possessions. With arrow removed, living alertly, they do not long for this world or the next. So let me go through that again and talk about it as I do so. For someone sunk in confusion, even if well concealed in a hiding place, seclusion is far away. So for someone sunk in confusion, the crux of Buddhism, the starting point of Buddhism, is the problems start with ignorance. The problems all start when we don't see clearly, we don't see correctly what's going on in the world. Our world, the world. So this is confusion. We're just not seeing clearly. So we're getting stuck. For someone stuck in confusion, even if well concealed in a hiding place, going away to a quiet place is not enough, because it then goes on and says seclusion is far away. Seclusion is seclusion from sensual pleasures and seclusion from unwholesome states of mind. If we can cultivate that kind of seclusion, if we can avoid, if we can stay in skillful states of mind, avoid unwholesome states of mind, and if we can pay attention to sense pleasures and not get stuck on sense pleasures, that's seclusion. That's the kind of seclusion that is conducive to advancing on the path, to finding peace. So finding a hut that nobody lives in, or the base of a tree, or whatever it is, that's not enough. So for someone sunk in confusion, even if well concealed in a hiding place, seclusion is far away. In this world, it's not easy to let go of desires. This world, for each of this world is our own world. Each of us creates our own world. The Buddha talks about the all. The all is everything that is accessible to our 6 senses, the 5 physical senses and the mind. That is the all. That, for each of us, is the entirety of our world. If we're in that world, it's not easy to let go of desires, because that world is created by our desires. Ice cream. What we see as ice cream is entirely dependent on what we think of ice cream. If we like ice cream, if we like to gorge on it, if we like Cherry Garcia, or that becomes our world. So in this world, it's not easy to let go of desires. Hard to free are those tied to wishes, which is the same thing, and bound to the charm of existence. The word existence is bhava, which also means becoming, and it's the 10th link in the link to the 12-fold chain of dependent co-origination, leading directly to birth, between clinging and birth. There's this arising, this leaning into creation, into becoming, and that's something we do. We crave, we cling, we lean into things, and our mind starts wrapping around and creating this world that is the world we are stuck on. So the other translation here is existence. So hard to free are those tied to wishes and bound to the charm of existence, bound to ice cream or tea or cookies or whatever it is. Once we start getting stuck on it, we start bringing it into existence in our world. Surely one isn't liberated by others. How can we be liberated by others? We're creating our own prisons. It's this very becoming that we do internally to create our world that is the problem. We can't be liberated by others. Others can help us see the way, they can show us, but they can't actually liberate us. Longing for what has been and what can be, they hunger for sensual pleasures that they've had, which is the past, holding the past forward, stuck on the past. Greedy, stingy, attached and obsessed with desires, they are wedded to disharmony. Desires, they can only create disharmony because they create separation. Once we create separation, there's a self and another, there's an us and a them, there's an us and something we want or we don't want. That separation is itself disharmony, and it kind of feeds on itself. Presented with suffering, they lament, what will become of us when we pass away from here? This, of course, is written in the context of a culture where karma is the essence of the belief system or the practice system, different understandings of karma. But what will become of us when we pass from here is our karma and our rebirth. It can mean whatever we want it to mean. It can mean in this moment, the dying and re-arising moment by moment. But presented with suffering, we lament, and we do. This is miserable. Where do I go from here? How do I get out of this? What comes next? Therefore, you should train right here. Right here. The only moment that exists is right now. This is when we have the chance to do the work, to become free. Don't do what you know is out of harmony with the world. And if we look closely, when we start, if we slow down, and that's what this practice we've all been engaging is, if we slow down and we look carefully at what we're doing, moment by moment, we can, in our hearts, start to feel where we're in tune, where there's peace, where there's alignment, where there's harmony, and where we're out of tune, where there's little jars, where there's discomfort, where there's tightening and suffering, here or out there. We can feel this, we can tune into this and we can feel it. Don't do what you know is out of harmony with the world. Life is short, say the wise. I see people thrashing around in the world, thirsting for states of existence. There's that word bhava again. And that's what we do. We thirst. As we get caught in the world, we thirst for a new job, a new car, a book that we saw on Amazon that we're inclined to order, a meal, a nice new microphone and video camera. We thirst for all of these things, and in doing so, we make them real. We bring them into existence. Thirsting for states of existence, not freed from craving becoming and non-becoming. The three cravings, there are three cravings that lead into clinging, and then becoming, birth and death. And once we start getting caught on that, it inevitably leads, craving leads to clinging, leads to becoming, leads to birth, inevitably leads to old age and death, suffering, lamentation, pain, grief and despair, and thus arises this whole mass of suffering. That pain and death, that old age and death, it's this body, but it's everything. This bell's going to wear out, this phone's going to wear out, the bowl of ice cream's going to melt, or I'm going to eat it and it's going to be gone. Old age and death is the nature of existence, and with that comes suffering, pain, lamentation, pain, suffering, grief and despair, this whole mass of suffering. So that comes out of craving, and the three cravings are craving for sensual pleasures, and then there's two extremes of becoming and non-becoming, or existence and non-existence, reification and nihilism. The middle way is simply avoiding those two extremes, not getting stuck on wanting to bring things into being, not getting stuck on wanting to push things out of being, which is simply another form of becoming. These are two different forms of becoming. One's affirmative and one's negative. And by avoiding those two extremes, that is the middle way. Lowly people weep in the face of death. So I just went through that chain of causation to death, which is where the mess really is. See them thrashing about in their selfishness like fish in tiny puddles of a drying stream. Thrashing about in their selfishness. This is, once that craving starts to take root, the self and the other, it is by definition selfishness. Because we've created that separation between self and other. All this existence falls on one side or the other. We've created this world of selfishness. There's no other word for it, really. And the metaphor of like flailing around like fish in tiny puddles of a drying stream, grasping for that which can never satisfy and can only diminish and can only lead to us suffering and death. Observing this, live unselfishly, not forming attachments to becoming. Subduing desire for both sides being becoming and not becoming, existence, non-existence, reification, nihilism. Free of greed. If you're not stuck on either of those, then you can just go straight and be without desire. And doing nothing one would reproach oneself for. A sage does not attach to what is seen or heard. So seen or heard are where our two most active sense gates engage with the world. Our eyes see. And what they do is they pick up signals and then they create a story. It's all created. Our ears pick up a signal and they create a story. So do not get attached to what is seen or heard. Because what's seen or heard is just what's seen, it's just what's heard. There's a story out of the, I forget, it's another one of the, it's either the, it's another one of the collections in the Khuddaka Nikaya, which is Bahia. And he's the guy who, he's wandering around on the far side of India, and he's pretty advanced in his practice, but he knows he's got a way to go. And somebody tells him to go visit the Buddha, so he walks all the way across India and finds the Buddha, and the Buddha's out with his begging bowl, and he says, "Buddha, please teach me, please tell me, how to wake up here." And the Buddha says, "Not now, I'm begging, and this is not the right time." And he says, "Please," and he says, "Not now." He says, "Please, please, please." It's the third time. Buddha has to answer. And he says, "It's very simple. When there is the seen, there is just the seen. When there is the heard, there is just the heard. When there is the smelt, there is just the smelt." And this, just simply this, is the end of dukkha. Just stopping right there when the senses engage and there's a sense experience. That's it. That's all there is. The rest we've added. We make up and we add. That's it. Not forming, a sage does not attach to what is seen or heard. Fully understanding concepts and having crossed over the flood, sages don't cling to possessions. Concepts can also be translated here as perceptions, which is one of the five aggregates. Perceptions, our perceptions are really how our mind creates our world. The senses receive information, and then our perceptions are how we build story upon story upon story, how we create the world. So fully understanding how perception works, what perception is, which is spending a lot of time slowing down and seeing how our senses engage in the world, and then what we do with that, which is not simple. It's very subtle and very complicated, but there's a lot going on in here with what we do with that. And it's the what we do with that that matters here. So fully understanding that and having crossed the flood. There's another one of my favorite suttas, which is Buddha. This is early in the Samyutta Nikaya. Buddha was talking to a Devata. Oh, it's a female Deva. And she says, how did you cross the flood? And he says, not standing still and not pushing forward. I crossed the flood. What? Yeah. Not standing still, I sink. Pushing forward, I create and get caught in turbulence. So not standing still and not pushing forward, I cross the flood. So another way of looking at not getting stuck on either of the two extremes. So metaphoric way of looking at not getting stuck on the two extremes. Not pushing forward and not standing still. And the floods, classically there are four floods, and they include sense desires, and they include becoming and not becoming, and they include views. So these are the things we cling to. And they flood us when we start clinging to them. They just become overwhelming, and we become flooded by them. Flood is a really lovely way of looking at that. Fully understanding concepts and having crossed the flood, sages don't cling to possessions. With arrow removed, living alertly, they do not long for this world or the next. The arrow is the arrow of suffering, so you remove the arrow. You don't look at who fired it. It's the second arrow, looking at who fired it, what the flights are made of, what kind of wood the arrow is made of, what the head is, what direction it came from. This is the story we start telling about the arrow that creates suffering out of pain. So removing the arrow, living alertly, paying attention the way we just talked about. They do not long for this world or the next, because there's no me. Once this happens, there's no me there. There's just seeing, there's just hearing. There's just the world as it is. There is just suchness. And that's it. So if that's all there is, how can there be longing for this world or for the next? Okay, so those are my words. Let me end the